Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by Congressman Jim McGovern, a Democratic representative of the 2nd Massachusetts Congressional District that stretches all the way from Worcester and from Worcester South to the Connecticut border, and then from Worcester West all the way to Northampton, and north from there all the way to the Vermont-New Hampshire borders. I'm Chris Oppie. I'm a professor of history at UMass Amherst and the director of the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy. Before turning to Congressman McGovern, I'd like to make just a few quick announcements about upcoming events. Next Wednesday, March 25th at 7 p.m., we're hosting a webinar called Suppressing Speech, the Trump Administration's Escalating Attacks on the First Amendment. That will be moderated by Lauren Harper, the Daniel Ellsberg Chair on Government Secrecy at the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And then the following week, April 7th at 7, we'll have a webinar called Targeting the University, Censorship, Political Power, and the Fight for Academic Freedom. A lot of this program we're doing this year has to do with threats to democracy, something we'll certainly talk about tonight. So it's great to have you, Congressman McGovern. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Well, I'm happy to be with you.
Great. Well, yeah, as you know, the Ellsberg Initiative for Peace and Democracy was inspired by Daniel Ellsberg, whose papers are in the UMass archives. And he most famously in 1971 revealed to the press and the public a 7,000-page classified history of the Vietnam War, which exposed decades of official government lies about the causes and conduct of that war, and then went on for the rest of his plus 50 years of his long life, in various forms of activism, primarily focusing on nuclear disarmament. So just thinking a little bit about his role in our work, I think it would be, we're going to talk a lot about current issues and problems, but I do want to spend a few minutes at the outset asking you about a little bit about your political coming of age and the kinds of events and people that inspired you to enter public life.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I'm happy to be with you. Look, I think I started to be interested in kind of political affairs when I was in middle school. Growing up here in Worcester, I attended Worcester Academy, which was then an all-boys school, and it was during the 1972 presidential election, which pitted Senator George McGovern, no relation, against Richard Nixon, the incumbent president. And we learned a lot about current events in the classroom, and I became enamored with George McGovern. I admired his dedication to peace, and also he talked about issues of nuclear disarmament. He wanted a better, more sane world. He was a fierce opponent of the Vietnam War. And anyway, I became interested enough that I volunteered at the local McGovern for president headquarters and
You're
passed.
like 14, right? You're only
Yeah,
about
yeah, 13, I think.
13.
Yeah, and I passed out leaflets and puts bumper stickers on people's cars, and even people's cars that didn't want bumper stickers got bumper stickers. And I was convinced he was going to win. And on election night, 1972, I remember listening to my transistor radio as the returns were coming in, and was heartbroken that he lost that election. But he did win Massachusetts, and so I felt that I had done my job. Anyway, fast forward to when I was in college in the late 1970s. I was at American University in Washington, D.C., and I was looking for a way to make a little money on the side. And I decided to go to Senator McGovern's office. He was still in the Senate, to see where I get a paid internship, and I did. And so for 3 years, I worked with him in his Senate office, and learned a lot about politics, about world affairs, and also about the importance of being a truth teller. I mean, George McGovern represented very conservative South Dakota, but was probably one of the most liberal, progressive members in the United States Senate. And he just told people what he believed. It served him well for many years, but he lost his Senate seat in 1980. And then I went to work for a guy named Joe Moakley, who was a congressman from South Boston. Another guy who influenced me greatly. Very different personalities, very different approaches to politics and government. But I really, loved working for Joe Moakley. He was a nuts and bolts, bread and butter Irish politician from South Boston and believed in that government was about helping people and making people's lives better. And he was a master at it. And then, early on when I started working for him, a group of activists from the Jamaica Plain Committee on Central America came to visit him during his office hours and talked about Salvadoran refugees who were coming into the Boston area um, who were being threatened with deportation. And they told him that it was not safe for them to go back to El Salvador. And so Moakley, came back and talked to me about it because I was handling his foreign affairs issues as well as his communications work. He said, "Go to El Salvador." This is the 1981 and 82. Go to El Salvador and see if things are as bad as they say they are. And so I went to El Salvador, and things were as bad as the activists from the Jamaica Plain Committee in Central America were telling Joe Moakley they were. And in any event, we then launched an effort to try to find a way to provide some sort of mechanism for the refugees to stay in the United States. Reagan was president then, and then we continued this effort into when Bush was president. And
And you led an investigation to try to uncover
yeah,
the complicity of the El Salvadoran military in executing 7 Jesuit priests and a few
so
others. Yeah.
so we ended up trying to help these refugees for many, many years. And then, this was from the early 80s to 1989. And that's when the 6 Jesuit priests, many of them who I knew really well, because during my many visits to El Salvador, I would meet with them. And some of them would come to Washington and we would host briefings with them. And in November 1989, they were dragged out of their bedrooms in the middle of the night and executed. And we launched an investigation into who did it. And we concluded that it was the Salvadoran armed forces who were trained by the United States, who are armed by the United States, who were financed by the United States. And Moakley led an effort to cut off military aid to El Salvador, which he was successful in doing. He also wrote a statute called the Temporary Protected Status Statute, which not only protected the Salvadorans who were here in the United States, but is used now to protect a lot of different refugees from other countries that don't quite meet the asylum standard, but nonetheless have a well-founded fear of persecution if they're returned back to their homeland. So both George McGovern and Joe Moakley, kind of were my teachers and were my role models. And when I uh, uh, when I decided to run for Congress uh, in 1996. I first ran in 1994 and I didn't win, but in 1994 and 1996, both of them played a major role in my campaign in helping getting me elected. So I'm forever indebted to them.
Yeah, some important mentors on issues of fighting for a more democratic and restrained foreign policy, more decent immigration laws, and with McGovern in particular, a deep concern about food security. All of these things we'll return to, but I can't help but ask you now to sort of launch us right into our present moment. As you say, you've been in Congress for almost 30 years now. So I'm wondering if there's been a time in your service where it has felt like American democratic norms and institutions and practices have been as deeply imperiled as they are at this moment.
I don't ever recall a moment quite like this one that we're now experiencing. I mean, again, I remember Nixon, I remember, Reagan, I remember, the Bushes, I remember, Trump, the first Trump administration, and never have I been more fearful for our democracy. Never have I seen an executive branch more contemptuous of the Constitution, more reckless, not only with words but in just ignoring the law. And I've never seen a Congress um, more afraid to confront him. Um, I mean, don't forget. I mean, when Nixon finally resigned, it was Republicans. Barry Goldwater, right, went to the White House and said, "You're done." And there's no Barry Goldwaters right now. All the Republicans are afraid of of Trump, and they'll privately tell you that he's crazy, but publicly they'll say that he's the greatest president in the world. And I'm also worried about, the weakening of the press, because, if the legislative branch isn't doing what it's supposed to do, and the judiciary branch has been compromised in many respects, you rely on the press. And we're seeing, major newspapers and broadcast networks being bought up by people with close ties to Trump, and we're seeing censorship. And so, what's left really, are the people, and people are pushing back. I just hope that the resistance is strong enough and is sustained long enough to be able to stop this kind of uh, creeping toward authoritarianism that
Yeah, I mean,
we see it.
it's hard to keep track of all of Trump's authoritarian threats and actual deeds, from assassinating and kidnapping leaders of sovereign countries to deploying military force against his own people, kidnapping immigrants and sending them back to El Salvador, which we were just talking about, in their brutal prisons, uh, extorting major institutions like media outlets and universities. Um,
Well, as we talk right now, we're at war in Iran, right? I mean,
yeah,
and it's illegal. I mean, one, but under the Constitution, he's supposed to come to Congress to ask for an authorization for the use of military force. He hasn't done that, and unfortunately, the Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader are only too happy to try to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's also a violation of international law. So people ask me all the time when I do town halls, where are the checks and balances? Why can't we reel him in? Why can't we demand that our laws be upheld, that the Constitution be followed? What the hell's wrong? Why can't we do better here?
yeah,
This is a very, very serious moment. I think more serious than a lot of people realize. And I didn't major in political science in college. I majored in history. And this reminds me a lot of Germany in the 1930s. And people kept on downplaying all the excesses, of those who were in charge, until it was too late, until they themselves became targets, until they themselves realized they couldn't do anything about, what was happening. And I really feel that, history's repeating itself. And again, it remains to be seen whether or not we can muster the political will and the resistance to stop it.
yeah. You know, Going back to Congress's role, there have been a number of congressional critics who have attacked Trump for failing to consult and go through congressional channels, which is important to note. But you're one of the few voices that have actually taken on the illegality of the war itself. I mean, it could, by any fair definition, if do you agree, be
Yeah.
labeled a war of aggression.
Yeah.
And then, and to go back to the World War II, the Hitler example, at Nuremberg, one of the principles they've found and wrote was that aggressive war is the supreme international crime that sort of subsumes all others. So that's not getting, in my view, enough attention.
Right. No, what we are doing, can be classified as human rights crime, as war crimes. I mean, I look, my critics will say to me, oh, you're criticizing the president for going after the Ayatollah in Iran. Look, he killed all these people. He's terrible. He's awful. I don't disagree that he was awful. If we're up to me, he would have been brought to The Hague, and he would stand trial for his atrocities. And that's what we have international law for. And we need to make it work better. But what we did was unprovoked. And what we have been doing, quite frankly, is dropping bombs, in a way that really hasn't taken into consideration the distinction between civilians, civilian targets and military targets. We bombed a girls' elementary school in Iran. I mean, and first Trump denied it. Then he said he doesn't know anything about it, and now we're told we just had bad information. Well, you did it. We did it. I mean, that we own that. And one of the things that I think people need to understand is that we are judged by the world community by our actions. We're not somehow so special that international law doesn't apply to us, or that human rights law doesn't apply to us. I mean, it applies to everybody equally. And just because Trump wanted to launch a war of aggression against Iran one day, that doesn't make it okay. And again, this is not about whether you like the Iranian government. This is about following the rules of engagement, following human rights law, following international law, which apparently this administration doesn't believe applies to us.
Yes. Going back to the congressional role, I'm often telling my students that the last time we waged war that was declared by Congress was World War II.
Mhm.
And in my own view, Congress has thereby really abdicated its constitutional responsibility. Would you agree, or do you think it's enough simply to have these authorizations of military force?
Well, I would like us to formally declare war. I think that's the way to go. If you can't get that, I would like us to actually authorize a war. I mean, go on record as saying you support this or you don't. We're not even doing that. And we did that in the Iraq War. And I think a lot of members of Congress, I mean, again, I oppose the authorization for the use of military force in Iraq, but we had Republicans and we had a chunk of Democrats who basically voted to authorize the use of military force. I think a lot of them now look back on that and say, "Oh, Jesus, that was a bad vote. It didn't turn out the way they told us it was. Oh, it wasn't a 2-day operation. It was a nearly an endless war that cost us, trillions. And so I think there's a reluctance by some of my colleagues to want to go on record, either for or against. They don't want to be blamed if things go wrong. They don't want to take a stand. And I think that that's moral cowardice. I really, I mean, I don't know what is more important to debate and to, deliberate on and to vote on than the issue of war or peace. I mean,
Yeah,
it is the ultimate question. And if you don't want to go on record and you don't want to take a stand, maybe you should go into a different vocation.
yeah.
Maybe you shouldn't be in Congress.
But Congressman, why aren't more Republicans rallying to this issue? I mean, especially given how much Trump campaigned in all of his elections on this idea that the United States should come first. We should not be engaged in wars of regime change, endless forever wars. That he was going to be the peace president, on and on and on. And now we have such blatant contradictions to those promises.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. I mean, he lied to people. Um, but here's my conclusion. The reason why more Republicans aren't challenging him, or even dissenting, is because they were afraid of him. They're more worried about getting reelected, not having a primary, having his blessing in the next election, than they are about, whether or not this is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And I will tell you that my biggest disappointment has not been in the the MAGA extremists that got elected that actually, believe all this stuff. My biggest disappointment has been in Republicans who will come up to me privately and say this war is crazy. This is a waste of, you know, of money. This is, we're unnecessarily endangering our troops. This is not good for our national security. And then they go on TV and say, he's doing the right thing. He's absolutely on the right track. He's a great leader. That I have a real problem with. I think people sometimes confide in me because they think, oh, I want you to know I'm really with you, but you're not really with me if you're not going to vote with me.
Right.
And George McGovern used to always say, "Don't throw away your conscience." And these people have thrown away their conscience. And I don't know why you'd want to be in Congress. I don't know why you'd want to stay in Congress if you were voting against your conscience on a regular basis. And I mean, how do you look at? I mean, and again, we don't even know we don't even know how many people right now have been severely wounded because the Pentagon is not being forthcoming with all the data. But how do you tell, a mother or a father that their son or daughter has been severely wounded or has lost their life in this war, and you don't believe in it, and you think it's wrong, but you went along with it anyway, just because you wanted to avoid a primary? I
Yeah.
mean, it's just not. It's you know, none of us are that important. History's not going to remember very many of us. So the bottom line is do your job, do the best you can, vote your conscience. That is what our founders had hoped we would do. And I've just been stunned at the lack of backbone and the lack of courage. And it's just been really disappointing, and it's been horrific for our country.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about elections. I want to talk about money in politics and voter suppression. Starting with money, going back to your career span, since your election in 97 to the present, do you feel like money has played a bigger role? And sort of right in the middle of your tenure came the very important Supreme Court decision, Citizens United. I believe that was 2010, which basically dropped all restrictions on institutional spending on political elections. So, is it gotten worse and worse? I mean,
Yeah, it has. I mean, money plays way too big of a role. Citizens United was a disaster. Um, and, um, and you want to run for Congress? It's not hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's millions and millions of dollars. I mean, we have races for Congress, that are tens of millions of dollars. So you get you get people dialing for dollars 24 hours a day, seven
from the
days.
beginning of their terms.
Right. Yeah. All it is about raising money.
Yeah.
And I remember when the Democrats took control last time, I became the chairman of the Rules Committee, and I had a bill to, basically to try to correct the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United in an effort to try to take the money out of our political system. But I thought I could lead by example. So I was about to be chairman of the Rules Committee, which is one of the more influential committees in Congress, and I made a public statement that I will not take any corporate PAC money, figuring that others would follow. Well, I made the statement. I don't take corporate PAC money, and I still don't take corporate PAC money, but not a lot of people followed. In fact, I don't know if anybody followed, um, because the need for money um, in these elections is just overwhelming, and it's corrupting. I mean, it really is a form of corruption because if one particular interest or one particular, you know, uh, corporate interest, just, ends up bundling money for you and raises a lot of money for you, and then there's a vote that comes up that you think is the right thing to vote for, but you hesitate because if you do, you may lose all that money that you've been getting, and then you don't vote the way you think you should. Well, that's corruption. And again, corporations are not people. Uh, they don't have a vote in the election.
Although the Supreme Court says they
And
are.
the Supreme Court said they are, but they're not. The corporations don't breathe. They don't. grieve when they lose a loved one. They don't. I mean, it's like it's ridiculous that we have to make the distinction. But this, notwithstanding the Supreme Court, they're not people. And I think our founders thought that people, like human beings, should matter more than these artificial entities, that have been created. And yet the reverse is happening. And money is, people. I'm on the agriculture committee as well. We just reported out a farm bill that's lousy in every sense of the word. It cuts SNAP by $200 billion. But one of the things in this farm bill is it provides liability protection to companies like Bayer Monsanto, people that produce pesticides and glyphosate, which there's a link between that and cancer, and like they get this liability protection. Now you say, well, like, why would anybody, you know, provide that kind of protection to a company that produces something that causes cancer?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is follow the money, follow the money. And not only did every Republican on the Ag Committee vote for that bill, but 7 Democrats did too. And I, you know, and I, you know, it's frustrating, but it's a reality we have to deal with. Now, the way you counter that is through people power. And I think we have to do a better job of convincing people that they matter, that they need to show up, that they need to be engaged, that they need to be sometimes confrontational, that protest is a good thing, and that you need to own your government. You need to take back your government from these big money special interests. Because if you're not engaged, if we're not building a movement, then the money wins. And I get it. I mean, I've been doing a lot of town halls, and almost everywhere I go, somebody will say to me, it's not one thing, it's 100 things. Every day I turn on the news, and it's not one issue. It's like 7 issues that really concern me, that bother me. And I feel like I'm drinking water from a fire hose, and I feel like I'm overwhelmed, and I don't even know where to begin. So I just want to pull the shade and wake me up when this is over. Well, um, if you pull the shade, all the things that you're worried about will never be over. In fact, when you wake up, things will be a hell of a lot worse. The only chance we have, is for people, good people, to be engaged. And you know, I and I look at it, I've been around long enough to know, that people power matters. And we just have to we got to between now and especially this election coming up in November, I think we have to do a better job of reminding people of that people need to participate like never before.
Yeah. Quick question. I mean, have you wrestled in the past with saying no to certain political action groups and sources of money that you could have used, but you just couldn't no longer accept?
Yeah. So, there are people on my staff who are frustrated with me because we have a lot of different groups that fall into that category. I mean, when you say no corporate PAC money, that cuts out a whole bunch of money because every corporation has a lobbyist in Washington and they all have a PAC, right? And so, and and look, I love this job a lot, and I feel that, I'm making a difference, and I feel that, it's worth all the sacrifices on my family and my wife and you know and the time. Um, but I don't want to hold on to it at all costs. It's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. I mean, if I'm showing up to work and I'm voting to protect entities that I think are wrong because I'm worried about money, then I think I would be incredibly disappointed with myself. Look, I'm not perfect. And I always tell people I've never met a perfect politician in my life, except when I first ran for office. I thought I was perfect. I didn't have a voting record, and then
Right.
I won and I served 2 years and I wasn't so perfect anymore. But at re-election time, I voted for me anyway because I was a hell of a lot better than the other guy. But the bottom line is I have made mistakes. Um,
Congressman, have you rejected money from IPAC?
yeah, I don't take money from
Yeah,
APAC.
I thought I'd read that. I just wanted to confirm that. Um, well, we have these very important midterm elections coming up in the fall. What Tell us what the Trump administration is doing and threatening to do to control those crucial elections.
Well, as we're talking right now, the Senate is debating the so-called SAVE Act, which the House already passed, unfortunately, which is going to make it more difficult to vote, requiring, putting more of a burden on individuals to register to vote, requiring more and very specific identification for you to be able to register to vote. And again, it's all designed, I think, to suppress the vote. Um, we don't. We don't, I mean, to the extent there's any election fraud in this country, it gets exposed. We find out about it. And by the way, the election fraud, it's not undocumented immigrants. I mean, the most of the cases about election fraud in the most recent elections have been Republican operatives, who have been trying to rig the system, and basically get votes counted that were illegitimate. Uh, but there's an attempt to try to find ways to make it more difficult for people to vote. I think Trump has decided that the fewer people that vote, the better for him. I don't know what that analysis is based on, but that's what he thinks. I don't believe the SAVE Act will become law. And that doesn't mean we're out of the woods because I don't put anything past this guy.
Exactly, because he'll need 60 votes in the Senate. Is
Yeah,
that why? Yeah,
yeah. And I think what they're going to do is debate this for a week and then agree that they can't get the 60 votes to move it forward. But I don't think that's it. I mean, I worry about him declaring a national state of emergency.
right,
I worry about him deploying our military at polling places or Homeland Security or ICE or CBP. I mean, you can't put anything past him. He doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about rules and regulations or what's right or wrong. He doesn't care about the courts.
right.
And so I think we have to be prepared for something like out of the blue.
Yeah.
And we just have to make sure that people show up, and don't get dissuaded, I mean, and take back our country.
Yeah, I agree. Even if he doesn't get these ridiculous ID laws where you'd have to bring your birth certificate or your passport, which would automatically exclude millions and millions of people.
Right. If you don't have a passport, it's $130. All right. I mean, so I mean, it's like a poll tax that they want to put into place.
Yeah,
If you're a woman who's get married and change your name and it's not the same name on your birth certificate and you have to have a passport, and I mean it's confusing. And then who decides whether or not the information you're provided is enough? And that's the other thing. I mean, this is a blatant attempt at voter suppression. I think it will not become law, but he will try to find a way to suppress the vote.
yeah. A little change in topic. Um, how much permanent damage has Trump's policies done to what we could call the social safety net from his, cuts to federal agencies, as well as that sort of the initial movement of the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, going through and slashing all these positions.
Yeah, I mean, the damage is overwhelming, right? I mean, Doge went in and eliminated USAID. I mean, I would argue that USAID has done more to promote kind of goodwill and national security for us because it's about trying to help people in other countries get fed, help them with, disasters, help them kind of have maybe help them economically develop. It has done more than almost any other agency, and he just went in and eliminated it. It's gone. Lots of international nutrition and food aid programs have been eliminated. Here at home, I mean, they have, gutted our social safety net. I mean, they've cut SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, by close to $200 billion. Put new work requirements in place, more red tape for people to have to deal with. So more people are going to lose benefits because of that. They've eliminated the farm to school program, which that allows our schools to be able to purchase, fresh produce from our local farms, getting our kids more nutritious food, helping our local farmers. A ton of major infrastructure investment programs to help our communities rebuild, dealing with everything from brownfields to polluted rivers and lakes, and all gone. Eliminated federal support for renewable energy. These guys don't believe that climate change is real. And they've doubled down on fossil fuels, and particularly oil, gas and oil. I mean, oil companies, are living the high life right now. I mean, everything they want that they get. And I mean, so if you're well off and you're well connected, if you're part of the Epstein class, this has been a great administration for you. You get some of the biggest tax breaks ever put into place. I mean, trillions of dollars in tax breaks for multimillionaires and billionaires. Um, I mean, again, all this liability protection for these corporate special interests. Um, I mean, it's
Yeah.
and the cost has been, poverty in this country has increased, homelessness has increased,
Yeah, that's what I want to
hunger has
drill
increased.
down a little bit on that. What, how many Americans rely on the SNAP program, sometimes known as food stamps, to
Yeah,
feed
I
their
mean,
families?
millions and millions of people do. And right now in this country, which is arguably the richest country in the history of the world, we've got 46 million Americans who are hungry or food insecure. I mean, that's in this country. And I say to people all the time that hunger is a political condition because we have the money. I mean, we know what to do. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we lack the political will. So we're okay with spending $1 billion a day in Iran, but we're not okay with making sure that everybody in this country has enough to eat. Um, and I think that that's a moral failing, and it really, and it's being accepted as just a basic fact of life. We're going to have hungry people in this country, and I don't want to accept that as a fact of life. I think it's I think it's unconscionable that people are hungry. And by the way, the people who are hungry in this country defy stereotype. It's not just people who are jobless or who are unhoused, right? It's increasingly the people who are enrolling in SNAP are people who are working full time. And by the way, the SNAP benefit is on average of about $2 per person per meal. I can't even buy a cup of coffee in the Capitol for $2. All
Yeah.
right, and that's it. And so it doesn't. The benefit in and of itself doesn't solve the issue of food insecurity for an individual or a family. It helps a little bit, but it doesn't solve the issue. So we should be arguing about, what is an adequate SNAP benefit?
Yeah.
How do we cover more people?
And you started something, I can't remember when, but in Congress, the Hunger Caucus.
Right.
Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah. We started the House Hunger Caucus and originally tried to bring Republicans and Democrats together to talk about this issue and to bring people in to help inform us about what the realities are all throughout the country. And we're still there in name, but it is not as bipartisan as it used to be.
Yeah.
But this bipartisan hunger caucus under the Biden administration, we convinced Joe Biden to do the second ever White House conference on hunger, nutrition, and health. And it brought people from all across the country together, from all kinds of different fields to focus in on what are the strategies that we need to, put in place to end hunger once and for all. And there is a roadmap. that came out of this conference that is a good blueprint for us to follow. And and it is not just about SNAP. It's about making sure our kids get good nutrition in schools. It's about making sure that our medical institutions understand that nutrition and food, are medicine, that our healthcare system somehow is divorced from nutrition and divorced from food. We ought to be able to give people food prescriptions. Medical students ought to learn about nutrition in medical school. We ought to have food pantries and CSAs at hospitals to again highlight the importance of getting people decent, good, nutritious food. And we're just not doing it. I've been meeting with some of the members of the MAHA movement, the Make America Healthy Again movement. Many of them who supported Donald Trump, and some of them, are in this movement because they're skeptical about vaccines, and I have a difference of opinion with them on that. But I've been meeting with a lot of them, a lot of suburban mothers in particular, who were originally attracted to RFK Jr. when he ran for president because he was talking about nutrition. And then when he joined Trump's when he was endorsed Trump, they thought, well, he will bring these ideas to fruition if Trump wins. And so they voted for Trump. And now they're terribly disappointed that it was kind of all talk and no action. But as a Democrat, we need to reach out to try to bring them back on board. Look, and I want our kids, and I want everybody to have access to good, nutritious food. The food we give our kids in school ought to be better than the food that we're currently giving them. Every school ought to have a kitchen. They ought to be able to do scratch cooking at our schools. We ought to teach nutrition in our public schools. We ought to teach kids how to cook. That's a life skill that everybody should have. And you can control, what is in your food if you know how to prepare it. And cooking is more than just buying something that's already been made and putting it in the microwave and pressing, 1 minute and 30 seconds. I mean, so there are some things that we can, advocate here that hopefully will bring some people who have kind of who we've lost back into the fold.
Like that. Well, we're starting to get a few questions in the Q&A, so feel free, those of you who are watching at home, to submit them. I won't be able to get to all of them, but I'll try to take a few of them in the final half hour or so that we've got. One of them raises the question of impeachment. Is it possible that Trump might be impeached for a third time and this time convicted? So John Bonifaz is asking, does it make sense, regardless of its outcome, to at least begin preparing to file for impeachment at this stage, given how many clearly unconstitutional acts he has taken? Then I would just add to that, since you mentioned Epstein, one thing I've thought a little bit about is, if all these files do eventually surface, and some apparently have been lost, that might lead us to Trump's complicity in pedophilia. If that really happened and was documented, isn't it possible that he could actually be not only impeached but convicted?
Well, first of all, I'm a big fan of John Bonifaz, and I always take everything he says very seriously. I do think we need to be preparing a file. We need to be keeping an accounting of all of Trump's illegal actions. And in terms of, what we do with it, I think a lot of that depends on what happens in the next election. And look, I had the United States Senate when the last time we impeached Trump actually did what I think even some Republicans now wish they had done, and that was impeach him and convict him. We wouldn't be dealing with what we're dealing with right now.
And you're only about 7 votes away, I
Right,
think.
yeah, right. Look, I'm somebody who believes that nobody is above the law. I believe that everybody, should be held accountable for illegal acts or wrongdoings. I mean, you mentioned the Epstein files. I mean, it's really kind of particularly stunning to me that, other countries around the world are holding, well-known prominent individuals accountable for their being named in the Epstein files. I mean, even in England, the Prince Andrew is gone, right? I mean, but here in the United States, it seems like everybody's immune, and that's a terrible, a terrible precedent, because what it's saying is that that you can abuse women and girls, and if you're well off and well connected and have a lot of money, you can get away with it. That's just horrific. I mean, I'm horrified that that's what is happening. And you should know that, by the way, on the Epstein files, the reason why they've been released is not because the Republicans finally allowed us to bring a bill to the floor to release the files. I'm on the Rules Committee. We tried 9 times to force Republicans to support an amendment, to allow an amendment to be debated to release the Epstein files. All 9 times they voted no. And so what we did is we took this extraordinary step of filing a discharge petition, where if you can get 218 signatures on a discharge petition, you can force a vote on the floor. We got the necessary signatures and we forced a vote on the floor, and they had no choice but to vote for it. I think the speaker thought the Senate would derail it, but the pressure was too great, and the Senate voted for it too. So that is why the Epstein files are being released, not because the leadership in Congress said, "Oh yeah, we need to do this because it's the right thing to do." We had to find a way around the Republican leadership to get this released. But accountability is important, not only because it's the right thing to insist on, but because I want people to believe in our government. I want people to have some confidence in our government. I want people to think, that serving in government is an honorable thing to do. It's not some sleazy, corrupt, institution, that where nothing good ever comes out of it. I mean, we need to change the view of government that so many people have, and the only way you can do that is to demand accountability, and whether it's through impeachment or whether it's through making sure we get all of these files released and we hold people who committed criminal acts accountable. I mean, but we have to take action.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, with that in mind, how much Congress pays attention to pressure from the public. I'm thinking particularly of what the response has been to the quite extraordinary presence of people protesting the presence of ICE in their towns and cities, and the No King's Day protest, of which there have been 2 major ones and another one coming up, I believe, in 10 days or something.
So let's take the ICE protests, right?
Yeah.
I believe without those protests, we would not have a situation where the White House can't get all the funding they want for ICE and CBP, right? I mean, it's because, and by the way, the protests are not only important to try to send a signal to Republicans, it's also important to send a signal to Democrats. And I think people have seen, not only the horrific and violent acts of ICE and CBP, but they've also seen the reaction. I mean, in my district, when I was at a Dunkin' Donuts a couple of weeks ago, and a guy came up to me and he told me he voted for Trump. He doesn't like me very much, but he appreciates me. And he said that that what ICE did in Minneapolis is something that he's very uncomfortable with, he's very upset about, and he wants us to fix it. So I think the American people basically are good, right? They have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and they have a sense of why fair play is so important. And their voices matter. I mean, they really do. And you see it now. I mean, the reason why there's a fight over ICE right now is because people have been out there protesting, and it has resulted in more politicians developing a backbone, and actually taking that fight to the House and Senate floor and to the White House. So it does matter. It really does. And we have to keep it up, and we have to expand it. I mean, we need more people to join in these protests. We need more people to show up in their congressperson's office or the senator's office and demand that they take action, that they right this wrong.
Do you think ICE is fixable or should it be abolished, as some people are saying?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's fixable. I want it abolished. I think I was the first member of Congress to call for its abolition back in 2018, because they were separating children from their families, which I thought was unbelievably cruel. I didn't. I've also voted against the creation of the Department of Homeland Security when it was first brought to the House floor. But I think ICE is beyond repair, and I think the best thing to do is just scrap it, and start all over again. Figure out a better way to deal with this. Look, we all can agree that we want secure borders. Yeah. But I think and Donald Trump said that they were only going to go after so-called the worst of the worst, right? Well, that's just not what's happening. I was in Dilley, Texas, a couple of weeks ago, and I visited the detention center in that community, and it is filled with families. It's like mothers and fathers and little kids. And I interviewed about 2 dozen of these families. All of them like showed up to all their appointments. They did everything right. They showed up to their court dates, and then inexplicably they were apprehended and brought to this prison. And they have little kids. They're worried about making sure the kids get good medical attention. The food sucks. I mean, there's this uncertainty. And some of them come from countries where, quite frankly, it's unsafe for them to be returned. So what are we doing? None of them committed any crimes. These aren't, people who are robbing banks or murdering people. These are people who are working in our communities. And one of the things that all of us need to do better is we need to change the narrative on immigration in this country. I mean, we are a nation of immigrants. Very few of us can, trace our ancestry to the land that we are now, sitting in right now. But I spoke to a conference the other day that the New England Council put on with medical researchers from around New England. One of the concerns they have is that some of the best and brightest researchers that are doing research right now in New England on trying to find a cure to Alzheimer's and cancer are from other countries. They can't get their visas extended. They're worried that they can't get their funding. I spoke to a gentleman who runs a nursing home not too far from Worcester. He says that, it was a great visit, but a number of his employees are Haitian migrants who are here right now under temporary protected status. Many of them have nursing degrees. He says we love their incredible employees. Donald Trump just moved to try to overturn their status to send them back to Haiti. Well, one, it's unsafe to go back to Haiti. Two, this gentleman's telling me, I don't have a line of people who are qualified or who want to do this work. So I'm going to have to tell people in this nursing facility they need to go home. Yeah, they can't stay here. I mean, this is insane what's going on. But what it is a distraction. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, all these attacks by Trump on immigration, it's about distracting people from talking about the economy, from having people kind of reflect on what the realities are in their life. So we'll attack immigrants this week. Next week we'll attack trans kids. Then we'll go back to immigrants. I mean, it's this game of trying to deflect so people are not focused in on the realities that they face.
A real change of topic here, but I did want to talk about nuclear issues in part because it was so key to Ellsberg's life and legacy. We have a question from Jacqueline Cabasso. Thank you for sponsoring House Resolution 317, urging the United States to lead the world back from the brink of nuclear war and halt and reverse the nuclear arms race. Why is this so important, and why is it so difficult to get Congress's attention, or for that matter, the public's attention, regarding the growing dangers of potential nuclear weapons used by nuclear armed states, including our own, that are functionally at war with each other?
Well, I met Daniel Ellsberg on a couple of occasions in my lifetime. I met him when he had just published his book, was it Doomsday Machine? Am I saying
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah. and here's a guy who, who worked in that field and who was an expert in that field and who understood the dangerous way that our policymakers, that our presidents, that our leaders were approaching the issue of nuclear war and of nuclear weapons. Look, I, I think we all should be dedicated to ridding this world of nuclear weapons, period. If they're ever used, that's the end of it. I mean, and there are all kinds of, so-called checks and balances in place that if somebody starts it, it doesn't end. It sets off a chain reaction, and we can destroy the entire world. And again, I think spending, I mean, the cost of building and maintaining our nuclear arsenal is like unbelievable. I mean, I mean, you could end poverty in this
Well, we've
country.
embarked on $1 trillion so-called modernization program of the nuclear arsenal, correct?
Yeah, I mean that's and where as if that that we might be able to use them in a way and coolly manage everything and everything will. I mean, look, if the alarm bell should be going off right now. We have enough crazy people kind of in charge in the White House, in the Kremlin, in Beijing. I mean, I could in North Korea. I mean, and these are people who have access to these weapons. We need to figure out a way to get serious about going back to the negotiating table and limiting the proliferation and beginning to reduce the stockpiles with the ultimate goal of getting to eliminating them entirely. I would like humanity to be around for a few more years.
But
Uh,
outside of the Progressive Caucus, are you gaining any more votes?
Yeah, the challenge we're having on this issue right now is getting people to want to talk about it. And we've been doing some special orders, which are these we take time at the end of the day in Congress, an hour or two to talk about topics, and we've done a couple of these so-called special orders on nuclear war and nuclear weapons. But it is not front and center. It is not a I'll be honest with you, it's not a topic that people are talking about. We're not doing hearings on this. The Armed Services Committee should be doing hearings. They're not. The Foreign Affairs Committee should be doing hearings on this. They're not. The Appropriations Committee should be doing a hearing on how much all this stuff costs. They're not. Um, and um, and so I'm hoping that maybe with a change in leadership, uh,
Yeah.
we might have a little bit more influence
Well,
in
if
making
I
this.
understand
Yeah,
this back from the Brink resolution, it includes not an immediate call for abolition, which that's a long-term goal, but there are short-term reforms that could make a huge difference. I mean,
yeah,
we have yet to pledge no first use of nuclear weapons.
and
We have not taken our weapons off hair trigger alert.
yeah,
We could easily get rid of ICBMs and
right.
still have a major arsenal.
Yeah, and Chris, I'll tell you, if you did gave a pop quiz to 435 members of the House and 100 members of the Senate, I would say maybe 5% would even know that. And so, we have some education to do. We went through a period not too long ago, with the nuclear freeze movement, where I thought we had some momentum, right? I mean, where this was a major topic, it was front and center. The news stations were running major stories on it. I remember Nightline back then were doing entire programs on the nuclear freeze initiatives and on the potential disaster of a nuclear war. I think we've kind of moved back from that. I think sometimes when bad things aren't happening right before our eyes, when catastrophic things are not happening right before our very eyes, there's this tendency to feel like, well, maybe this is not that big of an issue. But in the case of nuclear weapons, if we get to a catastrophic episode, I mean, that's it. There's no coming back from that.
Well, as you know, and Ellsberg often emphasized, it wouldn't even have to be the most catastrophic nuclear war imaginable. A relatively small exchange between, say, India and Pakistan,
Yeah,
create a nuclear winter scenario where enough ash and soot gets thrown into the stratosphere that there would be famine for for years and years, killing, if not homicide, not everybody would get killed, but maybe a billion and a half.
Right. Yeah, and the effects again linger for forever. And look, I mean, we need more truth tellers like Daniel Ellsberg to speak up and speak out. Those who are in key positions in not just this administration, but quite frankly, in the Biden administration and in the Obama administration and the Bush administrations. We need more people, to have the courage to speak out and kind of shock people into
Yeah.
understanding that this is real and this is serious. And I mean, you can't be lulled into a sense of security because, quite frankly, we're not very secure.
Yeah, now might be a good time to talk a little bit about Cuba, since that was the site of perhaps the most dangerous nuclear moment in our history, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I believe last month you introduced a bill to lift the U.S. Embargo that has been in place really since for how many decades? For
Over 6 decades.
six and a
Yeah,
half decades, yes, early 60s, which slight lifting under Obama.
right.
Trump clamped down again. Biden didn't do much, or too little too late. And now we're back to not simply our own sanctions, but preventing any oil
Right.
or other goods getting in from other countries. It's an effective blockade, which is by definition an act of war. So I'm wondering, tell us a little bit about that act you've introduced, and
Okay. The United States has, for over 6 decades, tried to economically strangle Cuba. And really, it has been an unbelievable hardship on the people of Cuba. I think it constitutes a human rights violation. And, I was part of a group that went to Obama to try to get him to, change that policy. He did ultimately. I actually went with Obama to Cuba when he announced that policy. And then Trump won, reversed it, and then Biden didn't do a damn thing until like a couple of weeks before he left office, and it didn't matter then. But what Trump's doing now, and basically sanctioning any country, interfering with any country that brings oil to the island, again, is yet another atrocity, in my opinion. It is a human rights violation. I think it violates international law, and it basically is just unbelievably cruel to the Cuban people. Look, what Trump wants, not just in Cuba, but all throughout Latin America, is he wants to create a bunch of client states where he can tell the people of Cuba or any other country what to do and how to live their lives and what they can say and what they can't say. And I don't think that that works. I mean, he may end up being able to strike some sort of a deal in the short term, but he won't be able to control people. That's not the way people are. And the Cuban people are a proud people. I mean, they want a good relationship with the United States, but they have withstood all the pressure that we have brought to bear, and that tells you, a lot about the character of the Cuban people. But the idea that somehow Marco Rubio, who's never been to Cuba, or the Batista exiles in southern Florida, should somehow go back and reclaim, whatever they want, is just like it's ridiculous, and it feeds into this notion that we're as bad as some of our critics say we are. I mean, that we're imperialist, that we're interested in power, that we're interested in money, and we don't really care about people or human rights or freedom and democracy. I mean, Trump went into Venezuela. Where he kidnapped Maduro, but he put Maduro's vice president in charge. Nothing really changed. The human rights situation, unfortunately, is still
yeah,
pretty bad.
and he's shooting all those boats out of the
Right,
water.
right. And he got a deal on oil.
Yeah.
That's what he got. But he didn't do anything for the people of Venezuela. He basically doesn't care about the people of Venezuela. It's about trying to make money for him or the people who donate to him. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear Trump say, "I want to open up a golf course in Havana," or "I want to, I want a Trump casino
Well, he's
someplace."
already talked about that in Gaza. When I think we'd be derelict if we didn't actually turn some attention to Gaza, which has kind of been off the front pages given all the uh, recent Iran and everything else. Um, what are your thoughts about the situation right now? I mean, the suffering continues. Uh, very little more is being done, but still not nearly enough.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, the situation in Gaza is horrific. I still get reports, weekly from people in contacts that we have there. And look, I think when Hamas attacked Israel on that October 7th, that was horrific, and that was a terrible human rights crime. And ironically, they attacked an area of Israel where there was a thriving peace community. And then Netanyahu's response, was vicious and ruthless, and I think constitutes genocide. And so I can't support any more money for the Netanyahu government. It's been quite a while now that I've had that position. And I fear that a lot of what we're doing right now in Iran is either at his urging or because we're reinforcing his view that he can wipe out everybody in Iran, that he can wipe out everybody in Gaza, and he can wipe out everybody in southern Lebanon, and with impunity. I don't think at the end of the day that provides Israel any security, and it certainly doesn't provide us security. When you bomb people, when you kill people, when you viciously and indiscriminately attack people,
Starve them.
you starve them, deny them health care. When you do those things, it results in resentment that builds and builds and builds and builds. It doesn't result in security. And history is full of examples of that. And yet here we are, not learning from history and just endorsing and engaging in these tactics that I again I I mean I met with a Palestinian gentleman who came to visit me. This was shortly after Israel launched its counterattack, and his entire family had been wiped out. And he said, do you know how I feel? Does anybody in this country believe that I'm a human being, that I matter? That my existence even, matters to anybody? I mean, we're people too, and you guys forget that. I mean, we are people too. What if it was you? I mean, you would want the world community to come to your rescue, to be your voice, to appeal to, the conscience of the world. And I think what a lot of Palestinians have come to uh, realize is that there are too many people in our government who act like they're not people, that they don't matter. And and I think that that's a tragedy for the Palestinian people. I think it's a tragedy for us because I would like to believe, that we can be a country, that, stands out loud and foursquare for human rights, that we are a country that, believes that everybody has
Yeah,
worth,
I
and
totally agree. I just
we're losing
personally
it.
worry that we're not going to ever get to that point to the extent that we continue to believe in American exceptionalism. I mean, this idea that we're indispensable, what does that make the rest of the world? You know, are
Yeah.
they dispensable? And I think too often we act that way.
No, I think I agree with you. I mean,
I don't want to, we're coming down to the last minute, though, minutes, another 5 or so minutes anyway. Um, I would like to see what you could say that could give us some hope for a democratic resurgence, revitalization. You mentioned history suggesting that things sometimes surprise us, maybe even when things seem bleakest. I wonder if there's some examples that stand out for you that we could turn to for sort of at least inspiration, if not models.
yeah, well, I think look, we should look at our own history, right? I mean, we should look at the civil rights movement in this country, the women's rights movement in this country, the LGBTQ plus rights movement in this country. I mean, we are capable of moving the ball forward. And we are capable of enlightening people and opening people's minds. And, people in Minnesota. And again, this terrible tragedy that we saw happen in Minnesota, with ICE, I mean, we're seeing the difference that people make in terms of protesting and coming forward and demanding justice. I mean, yeah, it doesn't happen as quickly as we would like, but it can happen. And I used to have a history professor who used to end every class. He would say the same thing, and I didn't really kind of appreciate what he was saying when he said it, but I do now. But he used to end every class by saying, "Remember, the world will not get better on its own." And he's right. I'm right. I mean, we all play a role in that, and things aren't going to get better unless we decide that we want to mix it up. My good friend, the late Congressman John Lewis, used to always, challenge us to get into good trouble. And he was the ultimate optimist, notwithstanding, all that he went through. This guy, John Lewis, was almost beaten to death, marching for voting rights over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. I reenacted that walk with him. And but he never stopped believing because he saw that we could change things. And and that's every time I get like kind of depressed, and we all do, right? How could you not with what's going on? I mean, I think of people like John Lewis. I think of people like George McGovern. I mean, George McGovern, who lost 49 states in a presidential election, who lost his Senate seat in 1980, I mean, who was, a victim of Nixon's vicious smear campaigns, and, who was basically ostracized by the Democratic Party for the later part of his life, was the most optimistic, hopeful person I ever met. I mean, who always would say to me, we can end hunger. We can end world hunger. We can do this. We should do this, and this. And he never stopped believing and never stopped giving up. And I think that that's a lesson for us all. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to feel like, oh shit, it's just too much, you know. But if we do, then the bad guys win. And and I'm not, I still got more life in me. You got more life in you. People who are on this call have more life in them. I mean, we wouldn't be having these conversations. People wouldn't be paying attention to these conversations if they didn't feel like, that there was hope. And again, this is the Ellsberg Initiative. This is a good time for people to go and read biographies and the history of Daniel Ellsberg. Again, I mean, talk about guts, talk about courage, talk about, risking it all to do what is right. Not everybody has to be a Daniel Ellsberg, but boy, we all could do something.
Well, he often said that courage is contagious, that had he not been inspired by other activists who were willing to put their security on the line, particularly the 3,000 plus young men who went to prison for resisting the Vietnam era draft, he would never have had the gumption to sacrifice his career and risk a possible life imprisonment under the Fugitive Act by releasing the Pentagon Papers. So, Congressman, thank you so much. You ended on a great note. You did inspire some hope, I think, in all of us. So it's been great talking with you. I really appreciate your willingness to come on and share.
I look forward to working with you on many, many more things in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Congress. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for watching.